Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. As part of my second book called Listen, Learn, and Love, Improving Latter-day Saint Culture, we talk about just things to improve our culture. And one of the chapters in there, chapter 6, is creating better understanding of mental illness and suicide. And one of its purposes reduce the shame and stigma around those two topics. And my guest on today's podcast is willing to talk about his journey, particularly with self-harm and cutting himself as part of serving a mission. And it's really brave of him to talk about. He's the first person in 500 plus episodes that stepped forward and want to talk about this subject. And I don't know a lot about it, but there's been a few people in my circle that have cut themselves. I don't even know the right language. Clark will probably help us. And I had no tools to help them or to really understand the totality of what was going on. So let me introduce you to Clark. Clark Barrow is 24 years old. He's a student at UVU. He's recently married. He's been married for 11 months to his wife, Tegan. He's working towards a degree in social work and would like to be a therapist in this general field after getting his master's to help others. Clark has been on the episode before. He was on episode 398, where Alec Barrow's kids came and talked about their love for their gay dad. So you can listen to Clark on 398. It's a beautiful family love story. Clark's dad did a solo podcast with Clark's dad and his mom on 397, sharing his story as a gay Latter-day Saint. But I was just touched by both those episodes and just the family love that's present in this family and the support of their dad and everybody as they're all walking unique roads. Clark is joined here by his bride, Tegan. They've been married 11 months, and she may share a little bit or may not. Often a guest will come and bring a partner or a friend, or in this case, a spouse. And I like that, just moral support. Is that okay for an introduction, Clark?
That is great.
And I'm just looking through my notes, listeners. So anyway, Clark did serve tell us what mission you served in and what years.
I served in the New York Utica mission from 2016 to 2018.
And just the big picture is you served a mission, you came home, early release, you went back and you came home again.
Yes, I went home after about 8 months for a knee surgery. And then ultimately when I came home early, it was due to the medical health emergency that was my self-harm.
Self-harm. Just give us some vocabulary before you get in your story. When I say cutting, is that a subterm of self-harm, or is self-harm a better term to use for people that are cutting?
So personally for me, cutting has, at least in my personal vocabulary, has always kind of had a negative stigma towards it. So I've kind of taught myself and the people around me to go with self-harm instead. Cutting is a type of self-harm, but I'm not offended when someone says cutting. I've personally taught myself and the people around me with self-harm rather than cutting.
Thank you for that. And I've always liked asking questions of people walking the space to help me understand the vocabulary, and we'll learn a lot together. I asked Clark before we went live, and we were just kind of talking this podcast, and he says, if you told me 3 years ago that I would talk about this to 25,000 people, you would have thought I was crazy. And this is the courage of people that bravely step forward to share their stories. Clark has used a couple words before we went live with me: stigma and shame. And I think that's our joint prayer, is that those of you that are walking this road with self-harm, because of Clark's story, and those of you that are helping others, will reduce the stigma and the shame around this so that you can improve and put this behind you. So with that, I'll just kind of get you telling your story, Clark.
All right. So kind of my path with self-harm, it started that break in between my mission when I was home for the medical release for my surgery. And I just kind of felt myself being pulled in several different directions. My friends wanted me to stay home. My mission president, stake president, and family were all encouraging me to go back out, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Everyone I loved was telling me to do something different, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And even just being home, I I almost felt like a failure for having to come home for a surgery that the injury happened during a P-Day activity. So I was like, if I had been more careful, I wouldn't be home. I'd be out serving my mission, which I loved my time in the field and I loved the mission. And that was the hardest part for me, was because I felt like because of a decision that I made, I was missing out on this experience that my friends in the mission field, I was still getting emails from companions about their weekly emails. So like I I felt like I was missing out, and it was this sorrow and this stress of not knowing what to do. And that kind of led to my first time self-harming, to my first time cutting. It was a numbing experience for me, that the physical pain put my emotional pain at rest. Because I've joked about it since, that it's hard to feel sad when you're in physical pain. Like, it is, there are typically several, like there's typically a few reasons why one self harms, and numbing is one of the common ones. And for me, it was always because of that numbing. And after I, at that point, I just was terrified that if I told my family, if I told anybody, that it would get back to, um, my mission president, and I wouldn't be able to go back and continue serving my mission. And I did go back out on my own, um, by my own choice. I decided that that's where I wanted to be. And so I did go back out, and throughout my months, my knee injury continued to have an impact um, on my ability to serve. And anytime, like there was many times throughout my mission that the pain and me feeling like a failure of that, again, that this decision I made on a P-Day was impacting my ability to serve a mission. And I was failing at being a successful missionary because of that. It would lead me to cutting multiple times on my mission. And eventually the gaps in between the self-harm got smaller and smaller, and it was becoming more and more of a reoccurring instance. And after I'd been back out, I want to say for about 8 months, I was assigned a dear companion that he was a break from some tougher companions I had, and we both just had this strong desire to serve. And after being together for a few weeks, he noticed I was becoming distant. Because I had kind of felt like I wanted to share with him. Like I felt the need that I needed to tell somebody, because at this point, I don't think I had told anybody about my self-harm, and I felt I needed to let somebody in. And I I shared with him about this self-harming, and he didn't know what to do. He was like, Elder Barrow, I feel like this is something we should talk to President about. And I looked at him and I said, I know you're right. but I'm terrified that it's going to get me sent home. And he said to me, he's like, if it does, that's where you need to be. Like, if that's where you need to be, the Lord knows that's where you need to be. So the upcoming zone conference we had our interviews with our mission president that week at zone conference, and my companion and I decided that I would go first for our interviews. And if I couldn't come up with the courage myself to tell our mission president, that my companion would then tell our mission president for me. And that is what happened. I couldn't do it myself. I was at that point, the only person who I had told was this companion that I grew very close to. And at this point, this president had only been my president for a month and a half, I think. So I wasn't ready to share. The stigma and the shame was still very, very strong. But thanks to my companion's courage to talk to my president for me, my president called me in again, and we had a conversation, and he basically explained that he didn't know how to deal with this. It had only been a month and a half since he had been a mission president, and that he would have to contact church headquarters and see what he was supposed to do. And about a week later, I got a call from him saying that self-harm is considered a mental health emergency, and that I needed to get home as soon as possible to get the help that I needed. And while part of me was shattered, like I wanted to serve my 24 months. I loved missionary work and wanted to be there. It felt like I needed to go home, and the timing was very important to me. It was 2 weeks before my brother got married, or 2 weeks before my cousin got married, and 3 weeks before my brother got married. And I think because I was able to make those weddings, that it distracted me from tearing myself apart because of coming home for a long time after I came home. It was because of this conscious decision you made to harm yourself that you are home instead of serving the Lord. And I think that the timing of being able to be at the weddings of my cousin, who's one of my best friends, and my brother, who I'm also very close to, that because I was able to be there, it kind of gave myself a break from this self-loathing and this pain that I caused myself, emotional and physical.
That is, let me jump in here, Clark, on behalf of our listeners. Thanks for just what you just shared. That took a lot of courage. And, our hearts just go out to you, because there's no intent, obviously, to come home, or I think our listeners and I can just feel your love of the church, your desire to serve, your wanting to do what's right. So this isn't like you woke up one morning and thought, these are the 10 things I can do to get sent home. Tell our listeners a little bit about your mind with that P-Day accident. I think I don't know if your mind went this way, but sometimes our culture says, well, you wouldn't get hurt on your mission if you were completely obedient or you were following all the rules. Was there any of that going in your mind, that this is my fault because just the way your mind works, that this was more than just an innocent accident? I'm actually responsible for this, or God doesn't love me, or I slept in 3 days that month, and so this is how God punished me. Just share with our listeners a little bit more of your thinking on that P-Day injury.
Luckily, I never really had those kind of thoughts. I did feel like it was the accident. I had dove while playing ultimate frisbee, and I was like, if I had just been a little bit more careful, I wouldn't have aggravated this birth defect in my knee, and I wouldn't have gone home because of it. But while like it was always my decision and not like a decision from earlier, that like it didn't feel like I was being punished. It felt like I made a stupid mistake and there was a consequence, but not that I was being punished in any way. And I just remember a member in one of the wards asked my companion, he's like, has Elder Barrow tried getting a blessing? And my companion was like, yeah, many times. And then the member said, well, maybe he just doesn't have the faith to be healed. And me and my companion just laughed at that. Like, it wasn't even one of those things where I took it to heart. Luckily I had a good enough support system then that like the Lord loves us. And sometimes there are some that are healed and some that aren't. And that's just the way it is. But it doesn't mean he loves me any less than those who have the miracles of healing.
Love that. There's a lot of nuggets in that are very helpful. Remind me and our listeners how long you'd been out before you came home with the injury.
I had been out 9 months before I came home with the injury.
Talk about just coming home. What were the best things you heard from people in your circle, ward members, family, friends? What were the best things? And because all of us want to do better when someone walks through the door. And what were some of the painful things, if any, you'd like to share?
In regards to the first time I came home or the second time? Okay, the first time. It was so the first time I left on my mission, we were living in Provo, and then when I returned, we were living in Springville. So I came back to a different ward, so I didn't really have much of a support group as far as ward members go. But my closest friends, it was as if I had never left. We just one day after my surgery, they just showed up and we just hung out and played board games, played card games for a few hours, and then they left, and it was as if nothing happened. And that was one of the most helpful things for me, that it wasn't this big weird thing that I came home a little bit early, that I was home for a surgery, that it was just, oh, hey guys, Clark's back in town, let's go hang out.
It's great.
Some of the more harmful things were, it was people asking, so when are you going back out? When are you going back out? Like, oh, do you think you'll be healed by then? Just, I felt like it was this constant pressure that I needed to know exactly when I was going back out, when frankly it was based on things out of my control. I had no control whether my knee was going to be healed in time for that first transfer mark for me to head back out on my mission, or if it was going to take a second transfer. But that was, and with another really hard thing was when people asking me, like, do you even want to go back out? Because my friends, they saw this pressure I was getting from my family, from mission president, stake president, like, to go back out. And they're like, is that something you want to do? And it was, but then it got me questioning, is it? And
did you feel more pressure to go back out and more conversations about that than your initial decision to serve a mission?
Absolutely. I never realized that, but absolutely. Like, there was much more pressure from everyone, as if the decision to go back out was more important than the decision to go out in the first place.
One of the chapters in this book I referenced at the beginning of the podcast, listeners, and I don't want to be just pushing my book, but I do think the book would be helpful for people. Chapter number 8 is Variations in Missionary Service, including early release missionaries. And a lot of early release missionaries share their story or things to say and not to say. And you said something that's very consistent with the book, the people in your life that just let you self-determine that decision. And you just got the feeling they loved you and didn't have an agenda in their relationship with you were often the most helpful and just trusted that you'd know what to do. And so I found that and just sort of, just sort of got on Clark's home. Let's go do what we used to do with Clark, which is what you need. You need people in your life that just love you. Talk more about, I love the word you use, numbness. So there's enough sort of emotion. I'm learning about this, listeners. Maybe you are for the first time, but someone helped me understand that the emotional pain, people that engage in self-harm, I'm not sure it's everybody's story, but it's just the emotional pain is so intense that trading that for physical pain is relief or numbness. Share with us more about that.
It is very hard to explain to, I have found, to someone who hasn't had this same experience. That it's just, I mean, right now a metaphor is coming to my mind is the eye of the hurricane. Like there's a torrential storm going around in my mind of this emotional pain and these external factors or internal factors just all just taking up every bit of focus and concentration I have in my brain, and that physical pain that it just I believe our bodies are wired to, when we feel physical pain, that it is now the main focus of the human mind is on the pain receptors. We don't want, like, the body likes to survive. It doesn't like being hurt. So as soon as something else that is going on that is causing physical pain, everything else just fades into the background. And it was always just a few moments of peace, like that everything that I was worrying about is just gone. And I was just able to relax for a few moments before everything came crashing back. And it always did, because now am I not experiencing the pain, the emotional pain I was before, but now I'm experiencing the emotional pain I was before, as well as the shame of self-harming on top of that.
Thank you for that. Very helpful for me. Therapists, and I've talked about this, listeners, a little bit, taught me the iceberg principle is what we see above the iceberg is often not what we need to. We sort of need to feel what's at the bottom of the iceberg. And if we just talk about what's on the top of the iceberg, we don't solve the problem long term. And that's where therapists and people like you that sort of can explain what's going on. And for those of us around you to go slow and try to figure out what's at the bottom of the iceberg to solve things long term. And you used a couple words that helped me understand your heart. Clark, you were shattered when you had to come home.
Everything that I had been for the past 18 months of my life, a missionary, a servant, a full-time missionary, a servant of the Lord, was just ripped from me in a few days. And it was really hard. I'm glad that I came home when I did, because, as I mentioned earlier, because of how busy everything was, it didn't give me time to loathe, to be hard on myself. But it was just, it felt, yeah, like shattered is the best word for it.
And then I just, I sent your heart just wanting to always do what's right, just wanting to make this work so intently, and then being shattered that you can't do what you love to do. I love your description of the self-harm just gave you a few moments of peace. it helps me understand how much turmoil you're in with just the anxiety, the stress you're feeling about your situation, and how those few moments of peace following the self-harm just it helps me understand what a difficult spot you would be in. And my empathy and my understanding for you increases, and my respect for you increases because I understand, connect more of the dots as I understand more of your story. Tell us about, if you want to tell us this missionary's name that you were so close to, and what was about him that you felt safe opening up to him.
His name was Elder Lee, and a big part of it was I almost felt like we shared a connection. Because two or three companions before him, I served with his trainer. That was the missionary who told the ward member that no, Elder Barrow doesn't just have the like, it's not a faith problem with Elder Barrow. And that companion's trainer was my last companion before coming home for the surgery. So like the companion, he replaced me, and then when I came back out, I served with him, and then I served with his trainee. So we all had this same area in common, Schoharie Valley, New York, which is just one of my favorite areas to like. It was just a wonderful little branch, and that we all just had this. We called it the Celestial Kingdom of the Mission. It was just this great little town, and that started. I mean, that was the initial connection I had with Elder Lee, and we just again, like, we both had the same desires, and it was very obvious in how we treated each other and how we treated the work that we wanted to serve the best we could. And it really helped me trust him. The practice that he and I started going into was each day finding the small miracles, we'd call it. At the end of each day, we just note back on the smallest things that we considered miracles, and it was the closeness of the companionship, and just the friendship we created, and this bond within the work I just always felt like a genuine care for me from him.
I love this. I love the Elder Lee in your life, and you felt safe opening up to him, which led you to opening up to your mission president, even though it was through Elder Lee. And that's kind of cool. So, listeners, you may know you need to open up to somebody. You may be suicidal. You may know you just need to talk to somebody, and you know who that person is, but you're not quite sure if you can talk to that person. I'm not sure this will work in every situation, but you may have a close friend that you can open up to that then can talk to the person you really need to talk to. And I don't think it's a weakness you didn't open up to your mission president. I think you just recognize that you didn't have that relationship. Maybe it just didn't feel right, but you had Elder Lee there knowing that he would talk to your mission president if you hadn't. I think there's a great principle of companionship and having each other's back and not walking alone that is scalable to all of us. Is just we sometimes need people in our life to have the conversation maybe we can't quite have. And then that allowed you and your mission president. I love both Elder Lee and your mission president saying, I don't know, versus having the instant answer.
Yeah.
I think sometimes us men sort of want to know, have the answer to everything. And I think it takes humility to say, I just don't know. So I thought that was terrific. So I love that you're home for your brother's wedding and your cousin's wedding. You're heartbroken, you're shattered. Do you come back to the Mapleton ward?
Yeah, we were still in Springville when we got
Springville.
Yeah,
Springville. Yeah, that's right. So just keep telling your story. Talk about if you give a homecoming talk, talk about if self-harm came back into your life. Tell us more of your story.
So I eventually did give a homecoming talk. It was almost, I think, 2 months after, which at the time it like looking back now, it seems inconsequential, but at the time it hurt. I felt like because I came home so abruptly, they were like, "Oh, we already have the next 2 months of speakers booked, so we'll fit you in where we can." And I'm sure that wasn't the case. And I'm sure if like if I like my bishop was not intentionally trying to make me feel forgotten, and I feel um, no sense of bitterness towards him. But so I just the reality of how I felt at the time. So I did eventually give a homecoming talk, and
let me just make sure I've got the time increments here. So you were out 8 months the first time and 9 months the second time?
It was 9 and 9.
So these are big chunks of time you're out. And so you've served nearly 2 years, 18 months or 16 months. And some of that time you're home, you're probably not released. But anyway, so that helps me and just maybe our listeners. These are big periods of time. 8 months is a long time. I want you to tell us, but I'm wondering, it just made me think that, is there added shame that, because a missionary coming home without an early release, often they know that release date and they're queued up to give that talk right as soon as they're home. Why an early release missionary, if that term's okay, that's sort of, and maybe we could work harder to talk to you and say, would you like to give your homecoming talk? And we can kind of work the schedule around so that there's not shame that somehow for early release missionaries, we have to wait a while to kind of work them in. Why a non-early release missionary, it's sort of hit the ground running. Just share with our listeners any thoughts on that.
I mean, I personally, if I was asked to give a talk and I got a call from a member of the bishopric and said, "Hey, we had somebody who just came home early from their mission. Do you mind speaking a few weeks later and letting them take your spot?" I think that every member would be understanding and just absolutely, that is completely okay. I would love to give my spot up to them. And I mean, anything we can do to help people who in any sort of in that emotional pain, because it is hard coming home early. And I've never heard anyone say, "Oh, it must be so easy to come home early." I think everybody acknowledges that it's hard to come home early, but I feel like we often don't think, what can we do to make it a bit easier? We just acknowledge it as a hard thing and move on.
Do you have any feeling about if someone comes home after 1 month, should they be given the opportunity to give a homecoming talk? 23 months or would the principle be, I guess this is a leading question, ask the early release missionary what they'd like to do?
I think that's the biggest thing. I think even with missionaries who served their full term, ask them if they want to serve, if they want to give a homecoming talk, because I know some are just feel like it's part of the experience, that it's not a choice, that they have to speak. And I think that if they served, whether they were in the MTC for a day or if they were in served their full term, that I actually don't like using that term, served 18 months or 24 months, that they should be given the choice whether to speak or not.
I love that. You took that one step further than I thought about. And I love one of maybe the themes of this is talking to you and asking you what's best for you and letting you receive personal revelation and supporting you. And maybe you would want advice at times and insight from others, but I think that helps when it comes from a spirit of love and this is your decision. We want to support you. And some early release missionaries might prefer to give a talk a couple months later after sort of the dust settles. Some would love to maybe just give the talk the week or two they're home. just like a 18-month or 24-month missionary. Because I think one of the goals here is to reduce stigma and shame. And not, so I like that. That's really helpful, Clark. So you're home. We're not done with your story yet.
So I was home. I gave my homecoming talk, and in my homecoming talk, I felt that I was not. I mean, I went into it thinking I'm going to share a bit of my story of why I came home early, and I could not find the personal strength to say over the pulpit that I had self-harmed, and that's what led me to come home, which I think is fair because that's a very hard thing to do. But I shared that I had come home for anxiety and depression, and there was an elderly sister in my ward. I can't remember her face or her name because I had been in the ward for such a short amount of time, and we ended up moving like 3 months after this. So I did not know the ward very well, and I do not remember her name, but she came up to me and said, I struggle with anxiety and depression so much, and very few people have the strength to say that over the pulpit. So thank you. And the entire time she was talking to me, I just felt inside, if only you understood how weak I am, because it was the self-harm that led to me coming home that I didn't see speaking over the pulpit as about this anxiety and depression as strength. I instead saw it as weakness because I wanted to share the story of my self-harm, but I couldn't do it. So
it's really honest. Is the I'm so weak because of the self-harm, or because you couldn't talk about it on the pulpit, or both?
Both.
It's honest.
Yeah.
Keep sharing your story.
And so for a time after I had returned from my mission, I was probably a solid month and a half I went without self-harm. But once I re-entered the workforce and just continued on with my life, I started finding myself feeling weak or feeling a failure again and falling back on this old habit time and time again. And up to the point where I was working at Quick Quack Car Wash, and I was trying, like, I was the assistant supervisor, the assistant manager position had just opened up, and I was trying hard to make this assistant manager position work for me. And so I was trying everything I could to prove my worth to my boss, to my company, to the company. And one Sunday we had planned to go and clean the trench at the car wash, just where all this muck and water just grows thick. And I had only been with the company for a few months at that point. I had never cleaned it before, but I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go in. And then my boss ended up, I believe she sprained an ankle or had some sort of injury and was in the hospital. And she reached out to the team like, hey, I can't be there, but I would really appreciate it if you guys could all go and clean the trench. Many hands make light work. So like everyone had like she had set the time of 11 o'clock. I showed up at 11 o'clock and nobody was there. And so I started my best doing what I thought was how cleaning the trench worked. And I was there for about 45 minutes and I got maybe 4 feet of this trench cleaned out, of this 40, 50 foot trench cleaned out. And no one else was coming. I was the only one there, but I just did not know what to do and just felt like a failure for not being able to do this thing for my boss who I'd grown really close to. And I was just like, she needed help and I wasn't able to offer her that help. And I went home, got cleaned up from the trench. It was disgusting. And I went back to the habit of self-harm. And I looked down at my leg after I cut myself, and immediately I knew inside, I just felt inside, like I went too deep. This is bad. I've gone too deep this time. I then I was living with my parents at the time. I then went into my mom's room. My dad and sister were at church. My mom was in her room, and I went to there, and um, she was the only person at the time who knew who knew that I was still cutting. And she only knew that because she would do my laundry, and but because of this, I felt just very straightforward. I'm like, I cut myself, and she's like, oh, okay, what's going on? I'm like, I cut myself, and I think I went too deep. And I mean, she entered full mom mode, got me laying on her bed, looking at it, looking at the wound, and she was like, all right, let's wait. Bobo and Lizzie are coming home. Bobo being my dad, and they'll be home in 10 minutes, and then we can decide what to do from there. They got home, and it was pretty unanimous decision. Like, we needed to seek help for this. Like, this cut needed stitches. We decided that we wanted to go to the urgent care rather than the emergency room, simply because my dad and we felt I had a good mental health support team. I had a good psychiatrist and a good psychologist I went to go to, that we didn't really want to go with the inpatient program. For me personally, especially in now, especially, like, I understand the value for inpatient emergency services, but for me and for our experience, we felt like that was not where we wanted to go. So we went to the urgent care, and the doctor at the urgent care said, he was very blunt with us. He said, the only reason why I'm not telling you to go to the emergency room is because you're telling me you have this support, that you have this psychiatrist, you have this psychologist. And like, my mom showed him the texts, like, we've already made the appointments. And he's like, that's the only reason why I'm letting you go home tonight. Like, and from there, I going to backtrack a little bit. When my dad and my little sister came into my mom's room, the sheer look of horror on my little sister's face, it was at that point when I was like, I don't care what relief this causes me. This pain that I'm causing my loved ones, I'm not going to do this anymore. And so that was like when I decided to start recovery. And that for the first while, like, I didn't want to be alone in my bedroom. So we set up a little computer monitor in the living room and connected my Xbox to it so I could play video games while my mom watched TV. And my boss, when she heard what happened, she was like, Clark, take a week off, take 2 weeks off, take all the time you need. Just let me know when you're ready to come back. And just the support and love that I felt from everyone I told, it just helped me tell, like, I was like, this doesn't need to be a secret. This is like, nobody, when I tell them, oh, I like, when they say, hey, why weren't you hanging out with us last week? And I say, oh, I was at home recovering because I cut myself very deeply. Like nobody was like, "Oh, geez, wow, that's kind of pathetic, man. You should have been with us." Like nobody. It was like that. Everyone was supportive and loving and understanding. Um, to the point where a few months after the incident, my family went to Italy, where my mom is from, for a few weeks. And I reached out to a couple of my friends and I'm like, I don't really want to be home alone for 3 weeks. Could you come live with me at my parents' house for a few weeks? And several of my friends, like almost as if they were taking shifts, like hanging out with me at, like, it was just so wonderful feeling this support group and this circle of people just all there for me. Um, and like to the point where one of my friends, he overheard my landlord talking. He was like, "Oh yeah, the family who live here is great, but their son is just a party animal." And my friend is like, "You don't understand what's going on. Like he was in the urgent care three months ago due to self harm, and like." And my landlord was like, "I had no idea." And of course, at that, since then, I mean, he, like, he's been great since then. Like, but just having that my friends stand up for me, and um, for a time, just stand, like when like it eventually got to the point where they were like, "Okay, Clark is ready to stand on his own two legs," but until that time, they were there, like helping me, standing beside me, and it was just so wonderful to have that loving and that loving supportive group. And to I mean, just even now knowing that um there is people around me who, if I did relapse, that they'd help me. um and I don't know, just no longer feeling like it was a battle I had to fight myself was suddenly made it a battle I could win.
Well, that was a great last statement in the middle of a whole great segment. It was a battle I didn't need to fight myself, but it was a battle I could win. I didn't quite say it as good as you did, but I'm struck with culturally, and maybe for men, and maybe this is a church thing or society thing, that I don't know if Puritan's the right word, but we kind of just work out our own problems and keep them to ourselves. And tough men do that. Maybe tough women do that. Maybe we're more faithful if we do that and just sort of present this face to society and to our church. That's toxic perfectionism, is what some people label that as. But I think this is one of your family's greatest moments. I think it's one of your greatest moments, even though it was a difficult time. I think it's an insight into your character, what led up to this, and then your willingness to talk to your mom and your impression that I need to talk to my mom. And often kids turn to their moms first. That's the way it works in our home a lot. And dads kind of get brought in, and we try to do the best we can. But I love your parents. They're friends. I know your parents. So it's unique kind of do this podcast knowing your parents. We're drinking Pellegrino, listeners. Clark and I, in honor of Italy, during this podcast, because I love Pellegrino and your Italian roots. But I think I think the test of families is sometimes how, the most beautiful moments, I think, in families are when they rally together in a difficult situation like your family did. And I think it's just a beautiful love story. And I love that you were open and honest. I love that you were open with your friends. I love that. I think it's a great sign of strength and courage that when your support system was gone in Italy for a few weeks, you had your bro friends and you were honest with them, and they love you and they knew what was going on in your life so they could bear, mourn, and comfort. And I would guess if I'm one of your friends in your friend group that I would know Clark is somebody I can open up to about the realities of my life. Clark will just get it. And I'm sure you've had many, many conversations with people that just know Clark is safe for me. And I can talk to Clark about the realities of my life and he'll just somehow get it. And I think that's part of creating Zion and part of mourn, bearing, and comfort is, our hearts are knit together to help each other. We're not meant to go through this life alone. And it's a great sign of strength, I think, to reach out to your mom, to reach out to friends, and to be honest about your situation. I'd love to, you're married now. This all happened before you were married. Your wife is here. I'm coming from a YSA background where sometimes the YSAs would ask me, should I talk to my future spouse about this? And whatever that was, we'd talk about. My general feeling was to talk to them, that it may end the relationship. That's a possibility, but I think being honest and completely vulnerable allows them to be vulnerable and honest and often deepens the relationship in a deeply authentic way. So just talk about you're dating Tegan, and this is part of your life. When did you, or just tell our listeners, I assume this came up some point before tonight in the podcast.
I've been kind of thinking about it during the podcast, like when I told her, and honestly, I think because of the support group I had, because of how casual a conversation it had become for me, I have no idea when it was that I told Tegan. Like, honestly, I kind of feel like it was something that I was like, oh, by the way, I've had a past of self-harm. It's been 2 years since I've started recovery. And I've been going strong since then. Like, I still feel urges sometimes, but I'm still going strong. And I feel like it was just, I don't want to speak for you, Tegan, but I feel like it was just kind of like oh, okay. Because I mean, at least for me, it had become just a commonplace thing for me to talk about with my friends and with my loved ones.
Let's slide that microphone over to Tegan, listeners. She's here, and I bet she'd love to hear what you want to say at this point.
Hi, I'm Tegan, Clark's wife. I don't remember the specific time that he told me, but I have been in situations multiple times. I don't know if that's just my godsend gift to the world, is having people feel like they can open up to me with this serious of a situation. So yeah, when he told me having those experiences in the past, having people open up, it wasn't jarring. Obviously, it was something serious to think about as a person that you're looking to marry. But I understood where he was coming from and couldn't feel the same pain that he had, but understand that it's not this crazy thing to want to cut yourself or self-harm. I think we've all had serious instances in our life where we want to turn something to cope. And if that's your coping mechanism, then that's what it is. Mine in high school wasn't directly related to self-harm, but I had a few coping mechanisms that aren't healthy. I think we all have unhealthy coping mechanisms. But learning that he knows how to handle himself and is open to tell me when there are those times, that even now, when he turns to me and says, I'm having a really hard time today. I have urges of cutting. We can sit down and talk about that. And we can walk through his feelings and just be open. And I would say to those listeners, I'm sure this is very helpful to those who have had experiences cutting, but to those who don't and are the person that is being told, just thinking back to my first experience of a friend telling me, it can be shocking, but knowing that they are your brother or sister in God's eyes and are going through something traumatic for them to go to that point, that the best thing to do is just love them and comfort them, not judge them for, marking themselves in this way, but holding them dear and letting them know that you're with them. They're not alone. So I hope that helps people understand.
It's great, Tegan. I'm thinking of your future kids, if you choose to have kids and are able to have kids with the skills you both have right now in your marriage, and the kind of conversations you'll be able to have with your kids because of who you are right now. And I think those will be paydays. This couple's been holding hands a lot during the podcast. It's just a beautiful love story. I wrote down a few things. I loved that you had skills and kind of have this spiritual gift, Tegan, that people just know they can talk to you. And that's a great spiritual gift. And maybe that's one of the reasons that Clark fell in love with you, is partly just felt safe being with you, and this deep connection that we have with our partners. It's multiple levels. I love that Clark has developed the skill to just open up. And so when Tegan came along, it was time to open up to your girlfriend, fiance, wife. You had developed those skills before Tegan came along. And you had opened up to Elder Lee. I think that was the first person you said you opened up to. You opened up to your parents. You've opened up to other people. And I think that's a learned skill, just to learn how to be vulnerable. And by hypothesis, it's harder for guys than women to do that. And maybe that's because our culture makes us like that, or maybe that's because we're wired that way. I don't know. Someone can do a dissertation on that, and come on the podcast and tell us what you found. But I love that you've developed those skills. And I think those are great skills to have going into a marriage. I think makes me excited for your two future. I love some of the vocabulary you used, Clark. I love this idea that you started recovery, and that you're still, I think that implies that you're in recovery and that you still are honest. You feel urges. Why do you use that vocabulary?
So, for recovery, especially, when I started meeting with my therapist, afterwards, he, actually, I think a couple months after the incident, my current therapist moved out of country, so I was given a new one, and I kind of explained the bit, and I said, I haven't cut in like 2-3 months, and he said, that's great. Don't say that. And so he's like, use the term like you started recovery. And then my dad quickly agreed, like, suggest like saying it's recovery, or keeping track of like the date that since you started recovery allows room for slip ups, allows room for relapse. Because like if you just keep track of it's been 100 days since I've cut, and then you cut, then you're back at ground zero and you just feel hopeless again. So it's always, for me, it's been 3 years since I've began recovery, so that if it allows a room for humanity, allows rooms for us to slip up and just keep going. There's no reset button on when you started recovery.
That's a great segment. I'd love you to talk, and you've done this already, Clark, but I'd love you to talk to those that are engaged in self-harm right now.
I it's hard. I it's hard to talk to such a broad audience, if I'm being honest, just because I know that so many people from so many walks of lives like are going through this, and um that so many people who do are going through self-harm have so many different motives for it, or things pushing their desire to harm. But I mean, there's I think Tegan's notes on coping mechanisms. There's healthier ways to cope. There's um, whilst it does sometimes feel like an old friend who's never failed you before, a way to just fall back on this. It does hurt you. It may not hurt you permanently. Like you may be able to heal from it. The scars may eventually fade, but it does hurt you. And it does hurt those around you. It's not just self-harm. I mean, the going back to the look on my little sister's face when she saw and the pain that my parents went through, and I mean the pain, when and Tegan, when I've told her a couple times, like, I'm having a really hard time and I'm considering it, and she's told me every time without fail, you're not just hurting yourself, you're hurting me too. I don't like seeing you in pain, and I don't want you to hurt yourself. It's and I know that sometimes it can make things harder, thinking, wow, I have so much responsibility for other people. Why would I think that way? Why can't it just be back to me just hurting myself? Because that's the reality, that we do have people who love us, even when we feel that we're failures, useless, or alone. That there's always somebody in our corner, whether it is our family, it is our chosen family, our friends, or if it's the Savior. Like, there is always somebody who loves us, and there's always someone who knows the pain we're going through.
Tegan's got some thoughts too.
Just with that, I know coming into Clark's family, they are a very supportive family. They have so many different paths, and each one is unique, and everyone is very supportive of one another. I can't say the same for, I guess, my upbringing. We all loved each other, but it wasn't the same as I've experienced in this family. Just to open up a bit, I was quite suicidal in high school. I didn't have that support system, and part of the reason I was suicidal was because of people at school, and so I couldn't really turn to them either. I don't really know how I pulled through. It might have just been I kept looking for lights at the end of the tunnel, not just one, but multiple things. But I would say if you are a spiritual person, the Lord really, really holds his shoulder right next to you. Yeah, and he will put people who you won't expect in your lives to just hold you up even for a little bit, to get you to the next place you need to go, whether that's through seminary teachers or the random freshman at your school who you talk to occasionally. Maybe your aunt. You just gotta keep holding on and knowing that your life isn't meant to be miserable. It's not going to be. You can seek help. I got help on my mission, and that was a wonderful experience to understand that my thoughts were valid. And I guess from earlier, the perfectionism that we were talking about isn't normal, I guess, or it shouldn't be. We don't have to be perfect, and thinking that it's wrong to have weaknesses isn't healthy. And to understand that is, honestly, I see people who can just come up right next to you and say, oh, well, that's okay that you can't do that. Oh, that's okay that you didn't do those things correctly. That's the superpower for them. I haven't fully developed that for myself yet, but I try and be that for others.
Thank you, Tegan, for being honest about your journey with feeling suicidal at times and not having people to turn to. And you said a couple things that no one's ever talked about lights at the end of the tunnel. In all my days, they've talked about a light at the end of the tunnel. But I love the hope you just created where you can maybe see multiple lights. They might be dim, they might come and go, but I love anything that can create hope at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel to me just represents the darkness you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And some people have told me, well, there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and that's a tough spot to be in. But if you can see different lights that maybe have different levels of brightness, that anything can give you hope. And I love, and sometimes you can't get to the end of the tunnel in one day. And so you'd said another phrase that's sort of like, you said, next place you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And there's hope in that just, you may not see how it's all going to play out. They may be overwhelming to figure, I've got all this time in the tunnel. I don't know how it's going to get, but it may be handleable. That's not a word, listeners. But if you just use what you said, next place you need to go, that was really thoughtful. More thoughts, Tegan?
I guess just with the next place you need to go, I think service or recognizing that you can help other people is a good thing. I mentioned a freshman. I think I found joy in guiding those younger than me, helping find my purpose to move on. High school doesn't last forever. So I was like, someday I'll get out of here. Not that that's the greatest mindset to not find joy in your situation, but sometimes that's all you can do. And, saying one day, I may find a spouse. One day I may have kids. One day I may have a great career. Life can constantly change depending on which way we make our path. And I think finding joy in those small moments in your current situation that may be hard, and as well as looking towards those dreams that you may have.
It's great. Talk about Clark. Just we've obviously, I think our listeners have inferred that you both are active Latter-day Saints, but you probably had some pain of the culture at times. And sometimes that pain can become a point where people step away from the church. But where does your testimony lie? What keeps you in the church?
I've always felt like I've had a spot at the Lord's table. I've always felt like no matter what the pain was, or no matter, the truth of it is that we are all humans. It implies that our leaders, our neighbors are human as well. So we're going to be hurt. And I just always known that despite the pain, that the Lord loves me and that there's always a place for me there. While I've never considered stepping away from the church, there have been many times where there've been a few months at a time in which I don't go to church because of the pain or because of anxiety. And I'm blessed with the ability to feel that even when that does happen, that the Lord still loves me. And when I come back or when I go to church, that He loves me for coming. I know of people who don't work that way, who feel guilty when they're not able to go to church due to their mental health. And I mean, to those people, I just say, He loves you, whether or not you're having a crummy day and can't get to church that week, whether you're not having a crummy 3 months and can't get to church. He loves you, and He will welcome you with a hug when you come back.
I love that. And listeners, I've been sharing this analogy a little bit on social media and the podcast, but I sort of look at this the swimming pool analogies what I'm going to give you. And I think the swimming pool represents the doctrine of our church. And one, you mentioned some of that, the Lord loves me. And I think the structure that makes a swimming pool possible is our leaders that hold the priesthood and the priesthood keys. And then I think the swimming pool is finished in this porcelain that should be just perfectly smooth to our backs as we lean up against it. And sometimes we lean up below the water line and we get jarred with something. And maybe no one else gets jarred there or sees other people getting jarred. And that to me is the culture that sometimes we experience, and others may not see it or experience it the same way. And so that's kind of that's an analogy that I've used to sort of separate the culture that sometimes makes it then harder to feel the healing water of the pool that represents our healing and hopeful doctrine that you mentioned. So maybe that's helpful for you listeners. Is there anything any of you anything else either of you'd like to add as we're ending?
Just kind of going back a little ways, but when Tegan and I were talking about having like that person or people you can talk to, and I said that even if there's no one on earth, there's always Christ. The best, I mean, something, if you feel like you don't have anyone, find someone. There's people aren't going to always listen and always be supportive, but more often than not, I personally believe that if you open up about pain and self-harm and anxiety, depression, even if someone is just barely considers you a friend, they're going to help in whatever way they can. Even if you feel you are alone on earth, find someone and people will help.
I love that. I read this quote every now and then, but I just thought I'd read it today from The Wounded Healer. Henry Norn, who's a Catholic priest, writes, "A minister's service will not be perceived as authentic unless it comes from a heart wounded by the suffering about which he, or I'll add she, speaks. The great illusion of leadership is to think others can be led of a desert by someone who's never been there." So you two are wounded healers. And you can walk people out of the deserts you've been in or sister deserts that are very similar. I love that you found purpose in helping freshmen, people that were younger than you needed your help. And I think we all need to be the wounded healers. Elder Holland's been open about his journey with mental health. But I think that's one of the greatest services we can do. But often it requires us to be authentic. And so that people know we can authentically lead them out of that desert because we've been there. You two are wounded healers. It's a good thing. It's a spiritual superpower. I like that word you used, Tegan. I think you used that phrase. to help others. And I think you're in your 20s. You've got a long life ahead of you of helping others in a really wonderful, unique, authentic way. And those of you that are in a tough spot right now, they're in one of those deserts, I think Tegan and Clark's words give you hope. And then the ability, and maybe this isn't binary that you need to get completely out of the desert to help others. Maybe part of getting out of the desert is helping others. And maybe that's what you did for those freshmen in your high school. It was helpful for you as part of serving other people. So I'll also put a link to the book I've been mentioning, Listen, Learn, and Love, Improving Latter-day Saint Culture. A lot of the things that Tegan and Clark talked about are in this book, so you can read that. It's an expanded book on a lot of these topics we talk about on the podcast. But Clark and Tegan Barrow, thank you for joining us on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler.